Okay.
This is Senate Transportation. We're back from our break, and we're going to finish a presentation that Andrea read from the Agency of Transportation had started last week, some time ago.
This week.
This week?
This week. Tuesday.
Whatever it was, right?
It's all a blur.
On the
Okay.
carbon reduction strategy, is that right?
Yeah, the carbon reduction strategy and the resilience improvement plan based on the T-bill from last year, the report that was required for us to submit on those two topics. So as a reminder, I guess I'll just say, yeah, Andrea Wright, Environmental Policy Manager for the record. I'm just going to pick up here from where I left off on Tuesday. A couple of slides back, we were getting into the strategy categories. We had gone through the baseline and what our capital programs, currently planned capital programs could achieve for greenhouse gas emissions. We looked at the gap, and then we talked about strategies and how we went out to the public with those and what they felt on them and the evaluation that we went through. Now we are into so chapter 4 of the actual carbon reduction strategy that outlines what more we could do as an agency and what more is available to other partners in the state to close the gap that we recognize. So just as a reminder, these were the 4 categories have to do with our transportation capital program. So expanding projects in that. We talked about that on Tuesday. And then we also talked about compact land use and teletravel. And that's where we left off. So that was a little more detail on the capital program, mostly just expansion of what we are currently doing. We talked about land use and teletravel and the options there. And then this is where we'll pick up talking about the strategies for zero emission vehicles. Again, just to remind you, the carbon reduction strategy in this section is laid out overviewing what our current activities as a state are, and then what additional opportunities we have and considerations in moving forward with those additional opportunities. So currently we have the Advanced Clean Cars 2 and Advanced Clean Trucks rules, which played into our baseline. We've got Drive Electric Vermont supporting us in our EV incentives. And then there is also utility and the federal incentives. You heard a lot more about those from Dave Roberts and Patrick Murphy yesterday. So our opportunities there are to continue those funding sources for these activities, and also looking at supporting charging, the vehicles themselves and the charging to support that transition. Even looking at home charging support, whether that's through the agency directly or working with our partners at other state agencies. What was brought up in the outreach was concerns about affordability and availability. That seemed to be the availability part a little bit more on people's minds throughout the summer. But of course, we're experiencing changes all the time. I know in your committee yesterday, you were talking about the Chevy Bolt and production of that. And so these things are kind of up and down. So that was definitely a concern that was brought up. There was also the concern about life cycle emissions and environmental and human rights concerns associated with the manufacturing of the batteries. So that all is to say, as we move forward, we need to consider these things, potentially consider doing more research and understanding the whole impact and benefits of these programs. And then the last of those 4 main categories was additional strategies. And that really has to do with advanced clean fleets regulations, or looking at a clean transportation standard or cap and invest program, or again, fee-bates. We did talk about that in our evaluation of recall from Tuesday too. So these aren't things that are happening in the state right now. And they're things that we could consider as a state moving forward with these. The carbon reduction strategy does say in our evaluation, when we're recognizing the gaps in both 2030 and 2050, that these, the evaluation did include quantifying advanced clean fleets and fee-bates it does still have a gap in those years for those requirements. So the carbon reduction strategy does say that there is potential to close that gap with the design of an implementation of a clean transportation standard or a cap and invest or some combination of those. Often those are, implemented in sort of an overlapping fashion. And so the carbon reduction strategy said that is something that the state should be looking at and understanding what other states are doing and how that could help us meet those targets. And I will say right now, the Vermont Climate Council is scheduled to vote today on a transportation recommendation that includes evaluating a cap and invest or clean transportation standard and looking at what other states are doing and doing a more in-depth technical analysis. So that vote is coming from the Vermont Climate Council most likely today.
Andrea, can you give us the short version of the difference between a transportation standard and a cap and invest program?
Super short. And, if you wanted more detail on this, there's folks at ANR who are really in the know about these. Clean transportation standard is really just about a declining carbon intensity of fuels, where a cap and invest is that with a much more robust clean transportation standard can also have credits. Cap and invest is much more robust in that credit system and earns a revenue that can be implemented to go towards other programs that we've talked about, those other strategies that we've already talked about to further reduce emissions. So it's a revenue source as well.
Like even the current federal standard of 10% ethanol could be part of a transportation standard, because they're just saying you need to blend in ethanol to reduce maybe not the carbon intensity, but that goal is to just reduce fossil fuel use. But that would be an example of a policy.
That would be an example, and a clean transportation standard. There are other states right now that are looking at a clean fuel standard. So not just looking at transportation fuels, but looking at heating fuels, more holistically.
And New York, in your next steps, when you say understand New York's program, that's considered a cap and invest program, is it not?
Yes, it is.
Okay. And you know is that NYSERDA or who's doing that in New York? Yeah.
It is NYSERDA. Yep. Yeah, and Agency of Natural Resources, like I said, this is really a policy type of decision, a potential regulatory decision. So they really are taking the lead on understanding what other states are doing.
Like their climate office is or
the Climate Action Office. I'm sorry, I'm like squinting at the screen because the box is so small. Looking at you, but the Climate Action Office has done outreach to understand what programs are available and what went into the development of those programs, with Oregon, with the Western Climate Initiative, and they have talked a bit to New York as well.
And is it Megan O'Toole, or do you know who would be the main person?
It's Megan O'Toole. Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
So then beyond those four categories, there was just additional recommendations, one around equity and one about tracking progress. And so just to say that we need to really ensure that no matter what we do, that we're looking at equity and understanding the concerns and making sure also that people understand. Definitely from our outreach, it was acknowledged that people are, if you don't know about things, there is a fear. So people did not understand what those additional regulations or, a cap and invest or clean transportation standard, what that means really. And so there definitely is a component of making sure that people understand those programs and provide outreach and education for those, and understand that when we talk about impacts, those can be, potential positive, potential negative impacts. And so just making sure really that what we're doing is in line with our equity framework and making sure that people have the understanding that they need to contribute to the decisions that are being made. And then, let's see, I think one of the other things that the carbon reduction strategy talks about is whose responsibilities these things are and where those roles play into each of those different strategies that we talk about. And so this sort of just outlines where different entities come into play for those and who would be the lead on these types of strategies.
Did we make a decision to not call it telework anymore? Now it's teletravel?
I don't know.
I don't know. I don't know that that's well, I think it's not just about working, it's about potential for other things to happen.
Like healthcare,
Like,
yeah.
yes, exactly, like doctor appointments and different things.
Right, okay.
So that's just a little more comprehensive. Let's see, moving on, because I do want to get to the resilience improvement plan too.
All categories with the legislature.
Yeah, we got to do everything.
Everything.
Yeah. Go ahead.
And then this is just types of projects and programs that are being proposed for the use of the carbon reduction program funds. You know, that list on the side, just the priorities and how they were based, relative cost effectiveness at reducing greenhouse gas emissions, but also providing those other co-benefits that we talked about in earlier slides on Tuesday. The support that we heard from stakeholders in the public, alignment with the climate action plan, and the potential, you know, the immediate need to implement some of these and the opportunities that we have. So kind of working at that low hanging fruit and being able to put actions forward. So yeah, so we're looking at, you know, the mode shift, bike ped, looking at bike lanes and sidewalks. We're looking at transit, and then looking at supporting the fleet conversion further.
So your anticipated funding of 31 million, that's through the
carbon reduction program, the IIJA.
through and that is multi-year, is the 31.
Yep, 32 million. So I mean, if you just broke it down evenly, about $6.4 million a year.
Yeah. You had that on a prior slide, I believe, but I just refresh my memory. Okay.
Yep. Yeah, it's federal fiscal year 22 through 26. So we've had the eligibilities are all different. For the carbon reduction program, we had to do this strategy, and it was due in November, but we had access to the funds before that. But we really haven't used those funds because we wanted to make sure we had a strategy to implement them. And we have some requirements of when those dollars need to be spent by, and basically, I don't know the exact numbers, but it's about half that need to be spent before the end of federal fiscal year 25. It's like a 3-year.
The match is, what is the state match on that?
It's 20%.
2080. Okay.
Yeah.
20, whatever. Oh, just the old Pareto rule, huh? Okay, 80-20. So we have to match the 6.4. Is that so? When you gross that up with the state match, then.
I will say also, it's, you know, there are a lot of different things that these funds can go to. So if we were to put them towards charging infrastructure, Patrick's talked about this, but those funds are local. They would be, the match for those would be private. So it's a little bit depending on which programs they go into.
Okay.
And then for tracking and reporting, there's a number of different things. The carbon reduction strategy has some recommendations, sort of stands to reason, but basically saying that we shouldn't just be tracking fuel sales, and that we should really be understanding other key indicators that help us understand, you know, vehicle miles traveled and rates of electrification and those sorts of things to really keep up on that. And that definitely we should be going out and making sure we understand how they're being effective and measuring use of shared paths or bike ped facilities, making sure we're understanding how the transit counts play into this, and doing surveys and understanding. So if this facility wasn't here, how else would you be getting to where you need to go? Are we actually replacing vehicle miles traveled by creating this infrastructure and programs that these funds could go to? This definitely aligns with what we're working on in the Environmental and Policy Sustainability Group. We want to have transparency and accessibility to our data in an easy way. So we are working on, we're really in the beginning stages, working with our performance management group in the agency to create some climate dashboards so that we know what we're getting for the funding that we're putting into it. And then the most recent thing is the Federal Highway Greenhouse Gas Performance Measure. The agency has responsibilities for reporting on a number of performance measures. There's 17 other ones that we report on a 4-year cycle. And this rule came out on December 7th and requires the agency to set its initial targets for reductions by February 1st. And so we're working again with Cambridge Systematics, who did our carbon reduction strategy, to develop our initial target, and we'll be sort of on the same cadence of reporting as all of our other performance measures, with the next report being due in October. So that's new. And I'll just also say that all of this greenhouse gas accounting really is new to state DOTs. You know, we've certainly relied more heavily on the greenhouse gas inventory experts at ANR, and you know, we're just learning about this at our agency and figuring out how we're going to continue with our measuring. And one of the ways is through the tool that Cambridge Systematics developed for us through the carbon reduction strategy. And we have actually a training right after this with a bunch of different folks in the agency to roll that tool out.
Yeah.
So that is all I had on the carbon reduction strategy. And I would like to take some time to also explain to you what we're doing for the Resilience Improvement Plan. So I'll move into that unless you have some more questions on the carbon reduction strategy.
You can move into that. I think we've heard some of this, so you could probably go pretty quickly because we have questions for Bradley.
Okay. So yeah, the VTrans Resilience Improvement Plan, I'll start by going over some of the tools that went into developing the Resilience Improvement Plan, and then we'll get into the plan itself. And we don't have a lot of slides, but so the tools, yeah, following Tropical Storm Irene, we really recognized that there was a need to identify areas that are vulnerable so that we could understand what the next storm might do and work to make those vulnerabilities more resilient. And we have a couple of tools that have been developed over the past few years that help us with that resilience planning. We have the TRPT, the Transportation Resilience Planning Tool, which is a web-based application. It identifies bridges, culverts, and roadways that are vulnerable to damage from floods. It estimates risk based on that vulnerability and criticality of the roadway segments, and then identifies potential mitigation measures based on the factors that are driving that vulnerability. And then we also have the Reducing Repeat Damage tool, and that grew out of a federal highway requirement to track locations damaged in multiple events. So this tool includes individual damage records. It highlights those repeat damage sites, and it's more of an interactive tool right now than the TRPT is. It allows those that are familiar with the site to go in and enter data, and so it's a little bit more real time on the data that it has.
And are both of those tools part of the project selection process that AOT has when they're building their?
Yeah, and I do have some slides on that. The TRPT has been used for that. We have just recently decided to change our prioritization system to reflect the Resilience Improvement Plan scoring rather than the TRPT. And one of the reasons for that is because the Resilience Improvement Plan incorporates the Transportation Resilience Planning Tool data.
And the repeat damage tool.
And the repeat damage tool is also in the Resilience Improvement Plan methodology. Yep.
Okay, good.
So this just is to say that, you know, it provides for what we're getting for Protect funding. My dog is bothering me. Go away, Gussie. And that we definitely have a need to be planning for resilience. We wanted to make sure resilience planning is happening, all over the state in a number of different ways. That the Climate Action Plan talks about resilience, the State Hazard Mitigation Plan. Both of those have laid out pathways and strategies for adaptation. We have the FEMA and DEM granting programs. ANR has a lot going on in this space, the watershed planning process, specifically at the local level. Hazard mitigation planning is happening. And then, we have the tools that the agency has developed. And this opportunity, so the PROTECT guidance does not require a resilience improvement plans. They're not mandatory, but completion and approval results in an increased federal match. So with that, the decreased local match, the state match, and an opportunity to sort of bring together a lot of what is already occurring in the state, we did decide to go forward with developing a resilience improvement plan. And the first step in that was defining our hazard and understanding what risks we had, the vulnerabilities. So we did this in coordination with stakeholders from Federal Highway. We had ANR at the table, Buildings and General Services, the Agency of Commerce and Community Development, the Vermont Department of Health, and we also included the state climatologist. And the foundation for our RIP analysis was that our vulnerability would be based on inundation, flooding, and fluvial erosion. So that's where our methodology was developed from. And then the next step was defining the goals. And so this slide has a lot in it, but we did this with several different staff with varying backgrounds throughout the agencies. We had planning staff, of course. It's definitely a strategic plan. So we had planning, we had engineers, myself, and then at the time, the other person who was developing this is also a professional engineer. We involved our designers and our engineers from our design teams. And then we had GIS staff that sort of brought everything together. So definitely a lot of different people within the agency working on this. And so we went from goals to measures to metrics. The goals really are about system resilience. So less future damage, respond and recover more quickly, ensure least disruption to and continued movement of people and goods. We especially wanted to make sure that vulnerable populations were included in that because of their dependency on public transit and those sorts of things. We wanted to ensure we are coordinated with other state and local resilience planning efforts. And let's see. So from there, a core component of the resilience improvement plan was developing this methodology to identify and prioritize resilience opportunities in line with the goals. So each goal has a measure, which is a way of tracking progress. And then the measures are translated to metrics or flags. And so the plan uses this weighted methodology involving high-risk sites as identified in the Transportation Resilience Planning tool. It includes our documentation of repeat damages. It accounts for transit routes. It uses the Vermont Department of Health Social Vulnerability Index to identify where those vulnerable populations are. We looked at community points of distribution so that we could support the needs of events, making sure that goods are still distributed during events and to keep the economy moving. And then again, we looked at what other state planning efforts were in place, and that all led to a prioritization of resilience locations. And so through this methodology, there's a possibility of locations earning up to 8 flags. And I'll just provide this slide. This is just one example of the methodology at work. So the goal is less damage in the future. We're looking at high-risk locations are known and have been made more resilient as the measure. And then this particular metric is about the repeat damages. So 1 flag if the same asset has been damaged in 2 federally declared disasters, and then 2 flags if it has been damaged in 3 or more. So we had a bit of a weighting. Some of the goals and the metrics only received 1 flag, and some of them can receive 2 or 3. The higher ones being the repeat damages and using the Transportation Resilience Planning tool that tells us where our vulnerabilities are. So we gave those a little bit more weight.
Okay.
And so that methodology provides us the ability, and this is where our GIS staff came in, to map our priorities, both for structures and roadway segments. So VTrans defined those high locations as road segments that earned 3 or more flags and structures that earned 2 or more. So using the data, we had locations with high number of flags, and we looked to harmonize those locations with the capital projects. We're also looking at locations that aren't necessarily asset driven as far as aligning right now with what's in the capital program, but are more standalone resilience-based projects. So we're working with our PMs to understand what program projects have resilience components already in them based on these priorities, and then which ones don't, and what more we could do in those projects to make them incorporate more resilience. There's not a huge opportunity for that because our standard practices and designs already incorporate resilience. So, but we are kind of aligning that and using that to determine how our funding will go out. And then the next steps really is understanding a bit more of those locations that don't necessarily align with the capital program right now. Understanding where those assets are, what those assets look like for condition, and understanding what the vulnerability and the mitigation, what a project on resilience would be for those. We want to establish metrics and track progress. This is a little bit, it's not so concrete like other metrics can be. And so we're working with other state agencies and other DOTs to kind of understand what they're doing to track their progress on this. And then we do need to do a little bit more work in incorporating resilience into the agency plans. It's already in our long-range transportation plan and in other asset plans, the rail plan. And so we just need to make sure that what we put into this planning is reflected in those plans, and see what more might need to be incorporated into those plans. And then we'll definitely look at interagency coordination more. So right now we're just using the watershed basin plans because those call out transportation projects already. So it was a little easy to align our methodology with what existed there, but we'll be looking at other plans also to see if those should be incorporated and earn flags in that metric system.
Great.
This is the last part, just the prioritization and how we are incorporating that into the report. Asked us to talk about how both GHG emissions and resilience are being incorporated, and these are the slides for that. Basically, we are looking to become, right now, the greenhouse gas portion of our prioritization is really qualitative, and we're looking to see if we can use that tool developed for the carbon reduction strategy to be more quantitative. And we just want to kind of understand that right now, greenhouse gas is 1/4 of one criteria in the prioritization system. And so we just want to make sure we're not putting a ton of effort into providing this analysis and weighing into it in a quantitative way for the small amount of points that it might get. For resilience, I mentioned that the TRPT was sort of the criteria or the sort of the metric behind the criteria. And we are now working with folks in asset management and our prioritization system to use the RIP flagging system in place of that.
And so when did they already start doing that, or they're going to start that? Like,
the resilience is already transitioned. The greenhouse gas is not. There's a lot of pushing and pulling on our prioritization system. And so we're definitely in line, and we're learning more. Like I said, we're having that training today about the tool. And so we'll circle back with them on the greenhouse gas emissions part of that, but the resilience is factored in right now.
so when they're working on 25 or 26 prioritization, this resiliency would be part of it.
Yes.
Great. Well, thanks, Andrea.
Okay. Yep. I see we're over time. Sorry about that.
No, it's our fault. We don't have any quick questions for Andrea? No. Good. Okay. Thanks, Andrea.
Okay. Thanks. Have a good day.
And now, Bradley Kuchenberg.
Well,
Yeah,
I
I'm
don't
gonna
know if
sign
it's easily accessible, but, the health department has that social vulnerability index. Can you get a little information about what that index consists of?
Sure can. Um,
You should be able to.
oh, here we go. I'm on it now. Perfect. Let's do that. Shoot. So many things. Okay. Wow, sorry about this. Just trying to get it. Okay. Good morning, Bradley Kuchenberger, Chief Financial Officer of the Agency of Transportation. Here to give you just a quick overview of the FY24 Budget Adjustment Act and the items that affect the Agency of Transportation. I believe yeah, looks like you might have, you have those pages. They're also up on the screen. So there's really only 3 sections in the governor's recommended BAA that affects the Agency of Transportation. I'll go through them in more details, but that's section 39, 48, and 58. Most of them are rather technical and don't have significant financial impacts on our operating or capital appropriations. So the first section related to AOT is section 39, which relates to the cash fund for capital and essential investments. So if you'll recall in 23 Act 78 in B 1105, there was sort of a waterfall appropriation, right? If there was X amount of general fund surplus, these projects would be funded. And a portion of those projects were these capital type projects. And AOT had 2 items on the list. One was community connectivity grants, and the second was what would be considered a capital more appropriation of the St. Albans District Maintenance Facility that we presented about.
We got
Last
paving on
session.
too, didn't we, in the end?
There was a portion of paving, but that we switched just right in the program development appropriation as opposed to in this B section. But that is correct.
And the community connectivity grants, what are those again?
Those were grants to communities along the Lamoille Valley Rail Trail that needed assistance to connect to the rail trail to realize all of the economic activity they were hoping for.
So those are still happening.
Those are still happening. Both of those items were funded in this waterfall list. The only
We
adjustment,
don't use waterfall, it's
contingent, sorry,
Why was that? Was there a reason or just?
Well, we just wanted to make sure that,
contingent appropriation,
that,
sorry.
because until you
Waterfall.
close out, you don't know how much exact
Yeah.
money that you've got, so it was a way of
And
structuring.
you thought the image of a waterfall gave impression
No,
of
the
too
wa-
much.
Yeah, the
Yeah.
water,
Gas going over.
I know.
You got too much gas going
Waterfall
over
was
the
like
dam.
blown over.
the waterfall was kind of a big wish list.
Right.
Yeah.
In order, and included things like a grand piano for the Vermont
Right.
Symphony, to you name it.
No, I appreciate the correction because I was thinking all last night of what is the right terminology,
Contingent.
contingency.
Yeah, it's all contingent that the
Yeah.
revenues are there.
You call it contingency, just section?
Just
or
contingent
contingency
appropriations
Contingent appropriations.
on condition, whatever.
So the St. Albans, I mean, that's gone forward,
Yes.
I don't know if they're
So,
under construction or anything, or how far.
We
is it?
have received bids. We'll likely have more formal presentation about where the project's at as we go along in the session. But in terms of the budget adjustment, there was no change in the appropriations. They just consolidated anything that was related to capital or like vertical construction to the
You're
capital
proposing
bill.
to do that.
The governor's recommend is
Yes.
proposing to do that, and I think it is based on the statement of legislative intent from you, Senator Kitchell, and Representative Nguyen. for your-
What's that in reference to? That bullet point?
The last bullet point,
Last, but the third one.
the
I'll have to
third,
Go
the
back
third
and look
one.
at my statement of intent.
Yeah, so that is, of the contingent appropriations, there were some of them that related to the cash fund for capital and essential investments.
Right.
The intent, I think, was to wrap those into what would be the capital bill or the capital bill adjustment in this portion of the
Where would
biennium.
we look at that? Because in fact, once we start using general fund rather than bonding dollars, those sub-accounts were set up very specifically to ensure sort of the delineation between the historical bonding and debt service versus how the general fund ultimately ends up getting appropriated based on all the other competing priorities. So I know the governor's proposed it, but
Yes.
it's something that we'll look at very pretty carefully. So no change in appropriations.
Right. And
So why is all this in here?
What?
Well, section 39, there's no change in appropriation. All you're talking about is the consolidation.
correct. So this is a portion of many items within that section 39, if you look at the bill specifically. And as to your question of why is it in there, I would defer to Department of Finance and Management on that
Okay,
one.
but Mike, in terms of the
Yeah, that has nothing
transportation
changed, right?
budget, then 3.5
Yeah, the money,
happened, and so
Correct.
you don't need to adjust for
Yeah,
that.
the conditions were met, the
yeah.
contingent appropriation has been
I
awarded.
know exactly, this has no, this is the governor's desire to go back to the capital fund as he envisioned it, as opposed to how we passed it. In terms of money, nothing, but I understand.
moving it around.
Yeah,
Yes.
no, right, it is revisiting, our construct of the fund and the two sub-accounts. So we'll keep going,
Okay.
as long as we know that it's not the money piece. Okay,
So the next section is section 48, which is the transfers and reversion section of the budget adjustment. There's 3 subsections of
all
that.
right, so I wanted to start with the first.
Yes,
Are you part of that 3.9?
That's the saving, this isn't at 75.
This is on top of, well, we have a debt service appropriation of 75 million.
correct.
And so transportation's portion of that debt service is how much?
Is $327,000.
You really are scraping the barrel here.
I think this was portion of, we were along for the ride in terms of the real impact financially is on the general fund and the relation to the stabilization
And
reserves.
Russ, what we're talking about here is by doing a transfer rather than a direct appropriation, then it's not subject to the 5% statutory reserve.
Right.
So what we're doing here is actually by going to a transfer methodology is reducing our reserves by about $4 million.
Right.
That's
And-
what it's boiling down to. So
Yeah, I
and
heard
this-
$2 million, so it's $4 million.
it's about 3.9 we were given. but I don't know if your share, which was 340, you said, right?
Yeah, 327,000. Some years it's been 500,000, but it's been going down.
Yeah, what are we still paying debt on though? I thought we paid off our bond.
We did on
Did
TIP,
bond.
we did, this isn't TIP.
This isn't TIB, this is related to the general obligation bonds, of which transportation fund has a small
Yeah,
portion.
it is very small compared to the,
So,
out of that 75 million.
in changing the definition, in relation to the transportation fund, we're talking about, maneuver of reserve funding of $1,600. So that's really lower
No,
minimum
you're-
impact.
But
It's
does
more
does
than-
it really, does it affect the transportation fund or, because that stabilization reserve is kind of the general fund? Or does the transportation have its own 5% stabilization?
It
Yes.
does, the T fund does too, the ed fund does too.
It has the same definition.
But this is just, which is a very small piece.
Yeah.
So you're just sort of you're the peanuts in the larger game, to put it bluntly.
That's right.
Okay,
That's exactly right.
and they had to do it for you because
If they don't, right,
you got swept up into it.
so,
Okay.
so that's section 48A4. The next two relate to reversions. The first is the transportation funds portion, excuse me, of the BGS info centers. They had surplus at the end of fiscal year 23 and 184,000 of it was related to their transportation fund. And they have elected to revert that balance.
And how did they, what's the basis of that reversion? Why did they have the 184,000 available to revert? Did something not occur? Something come in less? You know what generated
I would
the
have
reversion?
to get back to you on that
And their
specifically.
BGS info centers appropriation is that the BGS maintains the info centers rest areas.
They manage the operation of the info centers.
And maintenance.
And the maintenance, whereas if there's capital needs, you would see that in our capital program in our rest
So would
areas.
this just be savings from like maybe COVID when they were closed down or something?
It could be that, or it could be,
23 surplus.
a good year in terms of some of their special fund revenues. I know that they have some contingent revenues there, but I can get a specific answer for you, get back to you on that
Yeah,
one.
well, hopefully it's not because they're maintaining them less, you know?
Right, yeah, I understand your question.
Or it might have been just, some kind of short time limited closures. I don't know, we don't know.
It says info centers, but that includes the highway rest stops.
Correct.
That's, yeah. And we have a
All,
formula.
most of them, not all of them, some are private, public partnership.
Including the one in Bennington that nobody goes to.
Well, Senator Sears does routinely.
That's an insight.
Okay.
The other reversion is in the TIB fund. So there's a reversion of $3.2 million from the program development appropriation back into the TIB fund. This was action taken to balance the books at the end of fiscal 23. There was an appropriation surplus in that program at the end of 23 of about 5.1 million. Largely that is due to our TIB funding. We apply almost exclusively to bridge projects where we can, because the TIB fund language has in it constraints on asset life. Bridges have our longest asset life, so we try to apply those. We had some larger bridge projects that, namely like the Queechee Hartford Bridge and things of that nature, that we've had to rebid due to higher than expected costs, bid pricings. So those appropriations are available, but those projects remain in the capital program. We didn't have any project delays or changes as a result of this. It was more of an accounting function to balance the TIB at the end of the fiscal 23, which did have a slight revenue downgrade.
Okay,
Hmm.
I don't think we have questions on that.
Yeah.
Section 58, or do you have a question on that?
Well, that's a reversion, and that was something you did at closeout,
Yeah,
in order to fill the.
just to balance everything, yeah.
But then it, but you had to move it from program development to the TIB fund, simply because the TIB fund forecast got downgraded.
Right, and there, at the end of the year, we do the full accounting, the funds have to balance.
Yeah,
And
and so
we
this
just,
is just to get the TIB, but, what you move, I mean, all you did was move it from one place to, well, you took it from program development to fill a revenue shortfall, just have to fill
Yeah,
the TIB side.
yeah, and so what you'll see is the same sort of projects that attributed to the surplus will remain in the capital program, so it is reduction in, I guess it's an opportunity cost, not really a reduction in any project or financing, but it is an opportunity cost for future projects.
Means
'Cause
you
you
got
have to
less money.
Yeah, because now you have to do the same project and appropriate new money for it, right? There's less money. Section 58 is simply a technical change in the transportation bill. There was a $2.9 million general fund appropriation for the Replace Your Ride program. That was reduced by 550,000, 50,000 of which went to electric bicycle incentives, and 500,000 went to the newly established Electrify Your Fleet program. This occurred in the transportation bill, has been reflected in the various appropriations and programs. However, we need to reconcile the Appropriations Act to reflect it, and
So we didn't align the two? Oh,
Mea culpa, Senator.
okay. I'm looking at you, Chris, for obvious reasons. Okay. It's a
So-
lot of moving.
yeah,
All right,
this is
so,
a correction to
We
that.
had two other things. Yeah, one is, we have, Joint Fiscal Committee was sent a memo regarding Pay Act. It came from Hardy Merrill, and it talks about there's a $977,325 deficit between the Executive Transportation Pay Act appropriation and your Pay Act need.
Mhm.
So how are you dealing with that?
So the Pay Act report that, was that the report that went to the JFC?
Yes.
Yeah, in November.
Right.
So that is a formulaic calculation of, you have X employees, it should cost X amount. In reality, the need of the agency is almost always less than that. And so we take that into consideration when we put in our Pay Act appropriation on the Transportation Fund operating statement. So I believe in 2024, the amount is $2.5 million. That report is saying it should be somewhere more like $3.5 million. We are able to manage that through our, we've been experiencing vacancy savings at a higher rate than we had built into our budget. We have project expenditures that shift and change throughout the fiscal year.
Wouldn't you have to move that from one appropriation to another then?
Well, they're all, they're largely within the same appropriation. So
Yeah.
if there's project changes in the program development appropriation, the Pay Act needs also in the program development appropriation. If we experience a winter maintenance here that comes in under budget, that's also within the maintenance
So you're basically saying within your
appropriation.
existing appropriation, you absorbed it for.
Yeah, we're able to absorb that difference without issue. And then in terms of building our budgets, knowing our ability to adjust and react throughout a fiscal year, we choose to recommend those funds be budgeted towards like match for a federal project as opposed to being tied up in a pay act line item that we know we probably will not need in reality.
So do they do that memo every year if they're doing it based on that?
Yeah, it's a report, and I think next summer
In other
I
words,
will
you-
follow up with them and modify their report based on our more realistic budget
What did
projections
you
of what
use for
we
vacancy saving estimate then in building your budget?
typically we use at 5 or 6% depending on the year. And we have over the last couple of years, it varies at any given point in time, but it's been higher than that. In particularly in our maintenance and other areas.
Like a lot higher or just like a percent?
Not significantly higher. I'd have to follow up to get the specific number for you, but
Then we have a question about the money for the airport property.
Yeah, the purchase of the Franklin County Airport, of the land.
Yes.
Because you couldn't get an easement, and that was 2.8, which
Right.
we did authorize retroactively at
JTOC.
JTOC. But how did you jiggle around the money to pay?
So
Obviously you bought it, so you found the money.
the accounting for
I don't
that.
think you bought it on credit, right?
I-
Installment
we
plan.
don't, unfortunately, no. So we will have paid for that out of the aviation appropriation. As we're tracking through our budget monitoring, that appropriation has the significant enough wiggle room to fit that in, given all the project experience throughout the fiscal year. So I will be able to provide you a full accounting of that. I'll send it to Chris and he can route it to
So
you.
within that appropriation, you had sufficient funds to. cover the
Correct. There was some carry forward surplus that played into it, and our experience through our budget to date in the fiscal year allows significant enough room to pay for that
So you
land
didn't have to
purchase
move
out
it
of it.
from
If the
operating.
project did go forward or something.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay. Did you
So-
have anything else?
I did not have anything else. If you,
So those two higher expenditures you accommodated within the capacity you had with the existing appropriation.
Correct, yeah.
So you really don't have much here.
not really
Cash
at all.
fund is no money, it's just a matter of
The construct, as you
construct
said,
and
yeah.
whether we want to revisit our careful construct last year. Got net neutral, and some carry forward from somewhere, from BGS, I mean, from
So yeah, that's the only
Yeah.
connection.
Yeah, I'll follow up with you
Find out
on
what that-
the BGS number, specifically what the result of that amount. And get back to you.
We don't have any other questions, and we can
Sure.
prepare ourselves for the floor session.
Huh.
Thank you, Bradley.
Thank you very much.
We will adjourn.